Okay, a little recap of the Sicha. We said that there are now 3 different ways of understanding the miracle of Chanukah, because the Rebbe added his own Chiddush. Up till now, we said there was one regarding the increase in amount of oil. Every day they came in, there was more magically produced oil. The Rebbe said there's a problem with that, in that it's not anymore olive oil. It's only looks like and smells and tastes like olive oil, but it's not coming from an olive. So he casts some doubts on that. Then he says there's a question in the amount and the quality of the oil, which means every day, basically Hashem changed the nature of the oil, and therefore every day they only had to light an eighth of it. And then we also said there's problems halachically with that, because you have to have filled measures in the Beis HaMikdash, and also you have to have the right amount of oil. And for example, in the first 7 days, they would have had too much oil. They would have burned for far longer than the day. So Rebbe says the common denominator, which both these have, which is the problem, is that there was already an event that took place where these miracles with this type of miraculous oil, one with Sarah's tent and one with Elisha, they already happened in history. We didn't make a holiday out of them. So therefore, the Rebbe concludes that there's a third. The Rebbe concludes that there's a third new way of looking at this miracle, where he explains that it was natural oil, right? And simultaneously, if you're going to burn natural oil, it has to be consumed, because we also said that there's a mitzvah that has to be shemen laha'ir, right? The oil itself has to be producing the flame. So even if you wanted to say that there's like a sort of Hashem has the ability of making a flame from heaven come in and light the oil without consuming it, which he did in the burning bush, that's not even good enough, because we have a mitzvah in the menorah that the actual oil has to produce the flame. And when you produce a flame and your oil, it means you have to be consumed, right? And therefore, we have to say that the oil was being consumed in order to make a natural flame, and then simultaneously it was not being consumed. And what we have here is what we call nimna ha-nimnoyos, 2 totally opposite realities at the same time. And this, he wants to claim, is the uniqueness of the miracle, something which we only see in the Holy of Holies. It's like sort of like the greatest type of miracle that you could have. So then, in order to explain this, how this sort of plays out in Avodas Hashem, and what the connection of this miracle specifically to Chanukah. Chaver, you got to keep it down in there. Hello. Okay, so the connection to Chanukah, because this is a unique miracle Hashem made specifically for Chanukah, we have to see that in the Chanukah story and in the avoda and the lesson from Chanukah, there has to be sort of a connection with this unique type of miracle. So what is it? So we started to explain that in avodas Hashem we have something called our nature and our miracle. What did we say our nature was yesterday? Who remembers? What's the natural part of man? Our bar avodas Hashem. Yes. Yes, our avoda al pitam vadas, serving God based on our rationale, and therefore having emotions that are also produced from a type of meditation that makes sense to us, right? This is like the normal status quo, modus operandi, how a person goes in the world. They base things based on their rationale. However, a Jew has also something called above nature inside of him. He has a miracle inside of him. What did we say this was yesterday? Kabbalas ol and Mesiras Nefesh. The ability for a Yid to do and act towards Hashem and in the world in a way which defies his reasoning, right? It's the idea of like going above the nature inside of ourselves. And this is seen by Kabbalah soul, doing things even though we don't understand them or we don't agree with them. And Mesiras Nefesh, being willing to give even your life, which is obviously beyond the rational, for the sake of God. So we have inside ourselves the miracle and the nature inside of our own selves. I did want to point out one more thing that I forgot to mention, which is that the uniqueness about the way the Rebbe explains the miracle, despite the fact that it's like sort of a very high level miracle where you have these 2 opposite things happening at the same time, you also have a special presence of the miracle all the time. Because we said if you look at the miracle as though it was just a miraculous amount of oil, then when did the miracle happen? Only at the moment when he refilled the cups every day, right? But while you're watching the oil burn, there's no sign whatsoever of the miracle that happened earlier. A person who walks in, didn't know a miracle happened, would see no evidence of a miracle. So the miracle happened in the beginning and leaves no evidence. The second way we looked at it, where there was supernatural strength oil, the miracle would have happened one time in the beginning, but Hashem changed the nature of the oil. However, an onlooker would see the evidence that a miracle took place earlier, right? Because he's going to see the oil is burning slower, right? And so therefore the miracle happened, yes, only one time, but there's evidence of the miracle throughout the holiday. And the way the Rebbe explains it is that there's a constant state of a miracle happening the entire time the candles are lit, because it's being consumed and not consumed simultaneously, and that never goes away. As long as the candle is lit, there's this convergence of opposites. Fine. That being said, going back to the miracle and nature inside of man. And let's take it from inside, 202, right? So we in the second paragraph down. Amnam kol avoda chayeves lizbases al kabbalas ol mesiras nefesh kedivri Chazal yikabel lav ol malchus shamayim techila ba'achar kach makabel lav ol mitzvahs. So it's true that every single service in the Jewish life must be founded on Kabbalah soul, right? This aspect of our service of accepting the yoke really is it must always be present. As the sages said, you must first take upon yourself the yoke of heaven, and only then you can take upon yourself the mitzvahs. What's the problem? If you take upon yourself the mitzvahs before the yoke of heaven, that means you're taking on the mitzvahs based on how you understand them, because you haven't put a yoke on yourself yet. And therefore you're taking them on based on your reasoning. If your reasoning should say this one doesn't make sense, you might not do it. So therefore, the whole basis of all of Torah mitzvahs is that you first take upon yourself the yoke of heaven, Naisa, and then Nishma. Right, so this aspect of this, so to speak, miracle in our avoda, it really has to always be there. You know, why is that Hashem makes us found all of our service on this Kabbalah soul? Because a created being cannot rely on his intellect and his emotion to bring him always in conjunction with the will of God, right? In other words, by the Akedah is basically the great example. It would never occur to you, right, that you might have to just go and sacrifice your only son on the altar, unless you just had Kabbalah soul. This concept that your mind can lead you astray, we put it in all the mezuzahs. Lo sasudu acharei levavchem v'acharei ne'echem. Do not go after your heart and after your eyes. We don't know what Hashem wants. This whole thing is very mysterious. So to ensure that you're always going to go the right way, you have to base your entire service and even your understanding on this Kabbalah soul. However, yesh bekach dargos shonus, but there's different levels of how this foundational Kabbalah soul affects each person. Darga chasi, the first level is shargasha shel Kabbalah soul mesiras nefesh, right? That the feeling of your Kabbalah soul and the feeling of your mesiras nefesh, which is the nes shme'al hateva, the supernatural quality of yourself. It only is found in the beginning of the day. In other words, you start your day as you should with Kabbalah soul, because you can't go too far without it. You're going to start making mistakes, but it's only found in the beginning of the day. When do you essentially take on yourself Kabbalah soul? At the time of Kriyas Shema. A wise rabbi once told me, if you look at the word Shema backwards, the acronym is Ol Malchus Shamayim. It's cool. Right? So when you say Shema, you're basically closing your eyes and taking upon yourself that the one God is in charge. Right? Which means L'kabel alav malchus shamayim b'mesiras nefesh. When you say Shema, right? Actually, at least once a year on Yom Kippur, we're supposed to close our eyes and say Shema with the intention that we're ready to die right now for Hashem. So this is really the Shema of every day, and every Shema in every day, all the different Shemas, it has this quality of closing your eyes and saying, this is it. I'm willing to die for God. In fact, when a person, God forbid, passes away, that's the last thing they're supposed to do, say Shema, because they're basically giving their life to Hashem. So at this moment in your day, you take upon yourself this mesiras nefesh, and then as the day goes by, so this is like stage one. The rest of your day, you don't see the Kabbalah's ol on the person. He's running around serving with his mind and as his intellect dictates, which is not a sin, right? Because he's accepted the Kabbalah soul in the beginning, and the rest of his day he's going a normal guy, using his brains, etc. Yeah.
Would that be a better example for this? The first thing before you can do anything, Hashem, it's you. I completely give everything I have to you.
It could be. The only thing is that one might argue is like it's not really well thought out. You know, when you're in Moda'ani state, it's kind of just like a automatic. The idea of like reaching to Shema after Pesukei de Zimra is like you're like in a strong determination. I'm saying like, okay, I'm not going to start this day. You're in full cognizance, in other words, in order to make this move. Chevra, whatever it is, it could be Shema, it could be Moda'ani. The point is, he's saying that the Indian of accepting the yoke of heaven is essentially the Shema. You want to say you did it earlier? I'm sure no one's going to argue it. You could do it earlier. But the avoda of Shema, right, is supposed to be done at the beginning of the day, and it's accepting basically Hashem as in charge. Amnam hargasha zu b'techilas hayom mashira rosham al yom kulo. The reality is that when you make this declaration of oneness for God, even though it's just in the day, in the early part of the day, it makes an impression on the whole day. In other words, so that the rest of the day, even though you're doing everything with your rational mind now, it has this underlying foundation which makes an imprint on your rational decisions that it should be in accordance with God. In other words, because you accepted the yoke in the morning, your mind's not going to get away from you and start coming up with all kinds of crazy decisions and conclusions, because it's the imprint of your acceptance of God's yoke in the morning is going to kind of keep it in line. Ach b'kol zos, nonetheless, Kabbalah's ha'ol mesiras nefesh hanes kayemes behemshech hayom rak behelam. However, this miracle inside of you, this Kabbalah soul and the mesiras nefesh, right? It's only affecting the rest of your day in a concealed way. You don't see the evidence of your Kabbalah soul while you're busy living the rest of your day in accordance with your mind and your heart as they are, in your best understanding of things. It has its effect, right? It is based, so to speak, the rest of your day is based on a miracle, but there's no evidence whatsoever of that miracle except for the fact that it's sort of hiding out in there, keeping you on track. But there's no clear evidence of the miracle of the morning, the Kabbalah soul of the morning, when you're busy living the rest of your day. If you look at the person, in other words, like we said about the Chanukah miracle, you're an onlooker. You see a person living his life. He's a normal guy, right? Just like a lawyer, doctor, accountant going through. But little do you know, he said Shema that morning, and therefore he's not going to steer himself into any crookedness. But when you look at him, you just see him conducting his business. You don't see any special miracle inside. There's no evidence. That's level one. Darga shniyahi. Shargasha shakabalas ol mesiras nefesh kayemes b'techilas hayom mashpia begiloy al avodasu b'meshach hayom kulo. That his Shema was a little bit more intense, right? He took upon himself the yoke of heaven in the beginning of the day, and you can see the effects of his Shema in the continuation of his day. To the point that you can tell on this guy that he took upon himself this intense, you see, in other words, you don't just see a guy going around as a businessman, you see the guy going around as a businessman with a black hat on and maybe wears a beard. In other words, you see that he took upon himself a type of mesiras nefesh and acceptance of God's yoke, and you can even see it on him as he goes through his day, going about his business, even though he's conducting himself with tam v'das. But there's a clear the imprint that's there is not completely concealed. It shows up on him that he is a yid that took upon himself the Kabbalah soul in the morning. You following this? Ein hakavana sheb'meshech hayom kol hayom kulo asuk ba'avodah shel mesiras nefesh. We're still in the second guy. We don't mean that the whole day long he's busy accepting the yoke of heaven, right? He's not in a state of Mesiras Nefesh. You don't see him going into a wild Jewish sacrifices, that he's sacrificing himself for his religion and for God a whole day long. It's just that that feeling of Kabbalah soul that he took upon himself once in the beginning of the day, he still feels it throughout the day. In other words, it doesn't sort of disappear and just secretly guide him to allow his intellectual pursuits to not go crooked. He actually feels on himself the effects of his Kabbalah soul of the morning. But that's only level number 2. Darga Shlishi, see, the third level is that the whole day long, you can see that this person is shakua ba'avoda shel mesiras nefesh. He's moser nefesh all day long. In other words, you see that he is in a constant state of pushing himself, on miftzoim and running around with looking to light another yid's menorah and his candle. And in other words, he's taking on the yoke. And you see right now at this moment, this is a guy who's accepting the oneness of Hashem upon himself. In other words, it's almost overshadows his regular Tam Vadas type of character. Instead of looking at him and seeing a guy who's operating his business, having in a rational way, having taken on a strong commitment to serve God, you see him literally serving God. You see that he's serving God in a way which is beyond Tam Vadas. He's a Moser Nefesh Yid going down the street. Just like Rabbi Akiva said that all of his days, the Rebbe italicizes all of his days, in other words, continuously, you could see the interest of Rabbi Akiva that he wanted to die for Hashem. He was pushing himself to be in a state where he was like flaring, ready to push the envelope of the rational, the norm, all of his days. In fact, he was saying, when's it going to come to my hand that God's going to kill me for having such Mesiras Nefesh? He was waiting for the time. Which means he didn't just take upon himself in the morning Kriyas Shema Mesiras Nefesh. He was living with it all of his days continuously in all of his inyanim. So I hope you guys have put the pieces together already here. But we're seeing how our nature and miracle, right, align during a day. We're going to try and put this onto how it works for Chanukah. So he says, Shlosha sofanim halalu tuloy matzav haruchni hakayam. Depending on what is the spiritual situation in the world. In other words, how's the world looking? What's the temperature of the world? That is the difference between when you're going to have to employ one or the other of these 3 levels of divine service. Besharim ketikunan, when the years are normal, in other words, there's a Beis Hamikdash in the world, or hakadusha meir begilu beolam, right? There's a shining godly understanding in generally in the world, and in avoda we would call this the level of tzaddikim. Right, so if either the world is like holding by the level of tzaddik because God sits in the temple in Jerusalem, or even in Galus, but there's a guy who goes around and God is sitting in his Jerusalem. He's going around with clear and obvious divine revelation around him. Maspik shekayemes techushes mesiras nefesh b'kriyas shema b'techilas hayom. For such a person or for such a time in the world, it's enough that the feeling of mesiras nefesh, right, that he had in the morning is, in other words, should sort of leave an imprint on the rest of his day. He doesn't have to go further than that. He took on Mesiras Nefesh in the beginning of the day, and that's sufficient for him. Why? Ki ein choshech. There's no darkness. V'dai b'roshim shemosira Mesiras Nefesh k'dei lashpia al kach sha'avoda shelifi tam v'das tizbatz ha'keroi. Because there's no darkness out there, like stopping him. Therefore, he took upon himself his ol of heaven, his yoke of Shemaim, and now he can go around the world, basically just going according to Tam Vadas, doing things rationally and normally, and the imprint of his Mesiras Nefesh in the morning is going to have enough of a hashpah on him to make sure that his regular natural avoda doesn't get crooked and shake it off, because it's not that dark. There's not that much resistance to try and confound his intellect. But when there's a matzav of choshech yichas haaretz, when the darkness starts to cover the earth, right? And there's no Beis Hamikdash, and there's Gullus, or you're not a tzaddik, Ein dai b'kach, then it's not sufficient anymore that you have a little Mesiras Nefesh in the morning and then go conduct yourself in accordance with your own rationale the rest of the day long. Why? Because since you're at every turn, there's going to be a misnagid trying to take you off the path and make you go into a crooked way. The Mesiras Nefesh and the commitment that you're going to do things in accordance with godliness has to be felt all day long in your avoda of Tam Vadas. In other words, as you're busy using your mind and your heart in a human, normal way to make decisions, you have to constantly remind yourself, oh yeah, I'm doing this for Hashem, I'm doing this for Hashem, I'm doing this for Hashem. Because if you don't, the darkness will confound you. That little Kabbalah Sola you took over in the morning, if it stays in its place, it's not enough to actually keep you on track. So as things get darker, you have to make sure there's more of a continuous feeling of your Kabbalah Sola from the morning throughout your avoda of Tam Vadas during the rest of the day. And he says, in this level, right, there's two different manners. In other words, when there's darkness, when there's gullus, there's two different ways of handling this. And this is what he goes on to say. Ofen echadhu, one way, the first way is, just get the timing over here, 4 minutes, let's see what we can do. Shechash chas ha'olam mastir elokus rak ad kama sha'olam lashon helam malim es ora kedusha mitivo. So the first way is more gentle. The darkness of the world is covering over godliness, right? Because the word world anyway, olam, comes from the word helam. But it malim es ora kedusha mitivo, right? Mitzad zeh nikva beteva. In other words, it's sort of like a natural darkness. It's not like a inexplicable darkness, right? Chas v'shalom, sometimes we see they're just like a regular run-of-the-mill annoying anti-Semitism, and then all of a sudden, once in a while, it flares up like a ridiculous Amaleki and Yamach Shemo type of like shattering all norms, inexplicable anti-Semitism. So it depends on the level of the darkness, right? If it's like sort of a natural darkness, there's no Beis Hamikdash, so automatically there's going to be a certain covering of darkness. And since it's not so dark, we can continue on our general way of serving God, which is that we're supposed to use our mind, and we're supposed to use emotions that are based on our mind. In other words, rational, natural type of service, right? In other words, going in accordance with the nature of your godly soul. It's just what? Since you want to hold back a stumbling your spiritual situation of a Jew, there's a need, as we said before, that while you're busy going around your normal, natural way of serving God, you have to keep the morning fires burning and felt, because it's not the time of the Beis Hamikdash and you're not a tzaddik. And therefore, you have to make sure that every step you remind yourself of the Mesiras Nefesh of the morning. But you're still primarily going in a Tam Vadas natural style. In other words, you're still serving Hashem, so to speak, normally. It's just you're remembering your Kabbalah soul as you go. However, when the darkness of the world comes in such a way where it's not just a natural concealment, but it's misnagid l'ora kedusha. It's openly coming against the light of kedusha, right? And it's trying to cover you over. The Jewish people can be put in a situation of constraints and captivity. The world is not allowing you to serve Hashem, right? It's actually blocking your ability to serve Hashem. So you can't just go on your merry way with Tam Vadas, doing things naturally, because there's dark forces which are actually stopping you from being able to walk naturally and do things in a normal way. Therefore, there needs to be an avoda of a Jewish person, these bases be'ikra al milchama b'choshech ha'olam. You have to change your whole strategy of divine service, that you can't just go around anymore sort of being a businessman, but you're doing it in a healthy way, and you have all your Kabbalah soul in place. No, your whole life has to become a life of like fighting for godliness to shine into the world, right? You can't just live a normal life in a holy way anymore, because there's forces which are drowning your normal holy way of being, right? And therefore, you have to go out to war with this darkness, mamash. And this is called shviras achoshech. You have to break the darkness. You have to fight against it to the point that you transform it into light. And for this type of avoda, there's a need to have a continuous state of Mesiras Nefesh on every step, the entire day long. You can't just remember your Mesiras Nefesh in the morning and have it have an impact on your natural Tam Vadas avoda. You have to be working in a day in and day out avoda of Mesiras Nefesh, which is L'mayla Tam Vadas. You don't have anymore a regular way of being Jewish, a normal, natural way of being Jewish. You have to be a shtus to kedusha in a constant state, so long as the war is happening. Just like you see, we have soldiers. These soldiers were living normal lives just a year ago, right? This guy had a bakery. This guy was a banker. All of a sudden, these guys are in the army, 24/7, on call, in the borders of other countries. Excuse me, you can't just have a normal life anymore. Why? Because there's war. When there's no war, there's still anti-Semitism, but the guy can be a baker, this guy can be a banker. He'll remember his Mesiras Nefesh and he'll be fine. But in the time of Mamash ultimate darkness, your life changes. You can't go along your normal life anymore, right? In a situation where the world is just pouring in darkness, trying to stop Yiddishkeit, you have to change from being a natural serving Jew to a supernatural serving Jew, so to speak. Your miracle has to be on the forefront, overshadowing, as it were, your natural self. And we'll see, of course, how this all concludes tomorrow, Mizrat Hashem. You guys look very tired today, I must tell you. It's like an unusual lethargy. You got to get your miracle going.